"Your kind of people don't belong at a table like this," my father-in-law said, loud enough for the entire rehearsal dinner to hear. He was talking about my job. He was talking about me. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 48 hours later, the governor of this state would walk through the front doors of that same banquet hall, shake my hand, and thank me by name in front of every single person who had just laughed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Leah and I'm 31 years old. I've been a trauma nurse at St. Augustine Regional Medical Center for the past 6 years. I work nights, mostly 12-hour shifts in a unit where the hallway always smells like antiseptic, and the fluorescent lights never quite stop buzzing. It is not glamorous work. It doesn't photograph well. I don't have a LinkedIn profile with a corner office and a title that sounds impressive at dinner parties. What I do have is a stack of commendations from the hospital board, a departmental excellence award I keep in my desk drawer because I was embarrassed to hang it up, and the knowledge, the quiet, bone-deep knowledge, that I have held someone's life in my hands and refused to let go. My husband Daniel is a good man. I want to be clear about that before I tell you the rest. He is kind and he loves me, and he was, in the weeks leading up to his sister's wedding, completely outgunned by his family in every direction. I don't blame him for what happened. I blame the environment he was raised in, a household where image was everything and substance was optional. His sister Vanessa was marrying a man named Cole. Cole came from old money in the coastal sense, inherited property, a family name on the side of a hospital wing, the kind of casual wealth that makes people speak slowly because they've never had to rush for anything. Cole's mother, whom everyone called Bitsy, and I am not making that up, had organized the entire wedding with the precision of a military campaign and the judgment of someone who had never once been told no. My mother-in-law, Judith, had spent the 8 months leading up to this wedding trying to impress Bitsy. That's the only way I can explain what happened to her. She was not always like this. In the early years she'd been warm to me, if a little reserved. But somewhere between the engagement announcement and the save-the-date cards, Judith had decided that I was a liability. A trauma nurse, she'd told her book club, according to Daniel's aunt, who told Daniel, who made the mistake of telling me. Not a doctor, just a nurse. And the night shifts, you know what kind of people work night shifts. I didn't confront her. That's not my nature. I tucked it somewhere quiet inside myself and kept showing up to Sunday dinners with a bottle of wine and a smile. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Carlisle, which is the kind of restaurant that prints its menu in a font you need reading glasses for, and charges $40 for a bowl of pasta the size of your fist. Daniel's father, Glenn, had reserved the private dining room, chandeliers, linen napkins, a sommelier who materialized at your elbow every 12 minutes whether you wanted him to or not. I wore a navy blue wrap dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I'd spent more on it than I'd ever spent on a single piece of clothing in my life. I felt good walking in. I felt like I belonged. I stopped feeling that way approximately 20 minutes later. It started small, the way these things always do. Bitsy asked me, across the appetizer course, what I did for work. I told her. She looked at me the way people look at a strange smell, just for a fraction of a second. Then her face reset into something polite and closed. "How noble," she said. And then she turned to ask Judith about the centerpiece flowers. Glenn, my father-in-law, was on his third scotch by the time the entrees arrived. He was a loud man when he drank. Not mean, exactly, but careless. He liked to perform for a room, and with Cole's father sitting 2 seats away from him, Glenn had decided tonight was his audition. He started talking about family accomplishments. Cole's family has a son who worked in private equity. They had a daughter who just made partner at a law firm in Atlanta. They had a grandson at Georgetown. Glenn matched every item with something of his own: Vanessa's journalism degree, Daniel's project management certification, a cousin who'd once been on local news. Then Cole's father asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "And your daughter-in-law, what is it she does?" Glenn's answer came without hesitation. He didn't look at me. He was looking at Cole's father when he said it. "Leah works at the hospital." He said it the way you'd say someone stocked shelves at a grocery store. Accurate, technically, but stripped of everything that made it real. You know how it is, not everyone's cut out for the corporate world. Some people just want a steady paycheck and decent benefits. He laughed. Cole's father smiled politely. Bitsy tilted her head. Daniel's hand found my knee under the table. He squeezed it once hard. I covered his hand with mine and didn't move. I did not cry. I did not excuse myself to the restroom to collect my feelings. I sat at that table and I ate my $40 pasta, and I listened to my father-in-law describe my life's work as a fallback plan for people without ambition. But here's what Glenn didn't know. Here's what none of them knew, because I hadn't told Daniel yet. Hadn't told anyone because I'd only received the official letter 4 days ago and I was still processing it myself. 3 weeks earlier, I had been the lead nurse on a mass casualty response at St. Augustine Regional. A gas line explosion at a mid-rise apartment building 2 miles from the hospital had sent 47 people through our doors in under 90 minutes. The ER was overwhelmed within the first 20 minutes. Our trauma attending physician was trapped in an elevator malfunction at the parking structure. He didn't make it to the floor for nearly half an hour. For those 28 minutes I ran the trauma bay. I made triage calls that should have been a doctor's responsibility. I initiated 2 chest decompressions. I coordinated the entire nursing staff across 4 simultaneous critical patients. I made a call to divert 3 incoming ambulances to secondary facilities based on injury patterns and our current capacity, a call that, according to the formal review afterwards, saved at least 2 lives by preventing further overwhelm. When Dr. Anand finally made it to the floor and reviewed what had happened, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You didn't just hold the line, Leah, you held the whole floor." He filed a formal commendation. The hospital board reviewed the incident. And 4 days before this rehearsal dinner, I had received a letter informing me that I would be honored at the state's annual Healthcare Excellence Gala with the Governor's Award for Emergency Services, the highest civilian recognition in our state for medical response work. I had not told Glenn. I had not told Judith. I had not told Bitsy or Cole's father. I sat at that rehearsal dinner table, with my father-in-law's laughter still hanging in the chandelier light, and I thought about that letter sitting in the top drawer of my nightstand. I thought about telling them right then. I imagined watching Glenn's face change. I didn't. I folded that knowledge up small and kept it close. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I thanked Judith for including me in the seating arrangement. When Daniel and I got to the car, he put his hands on the steering wheel and didn't start the engine. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something." "It's okay," I told him. And then, because I was tired of carrying it alone, "I need to tell you something." I told him about the letter. I watched his face in the blue light of the parking garage. He went very still. Then he said very quietly, "When is the gala?" I told him the date. He turned to look at me. "Leah, that's the same day as Vanessa's reception." We sat with that for a moment. "I'm not missing my sister's wedding," he said. "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to." What I didn't say yet, what I was still working out, was that the gala had offered me an option. A representative could accept on my behalf if I couldn't attend in person. And the governor's office had asked, as part of the award ceremony, whether I would be willing to have a short video tribute prepared and played at the gala. Standard procedure for recipients who couldn't make it. I'd said yes to the video, without fully thinking through what that meant. The wedding was held at Whitmore Estate, which is exactly the kind of venue name you'd expect. A restored plantation-style property outside the city, with white columns and a lawn that rolled down to a man-made pond. Rented for a sum I'm choosing not to think about. The ceremony was outdoors, cocktail hour on the terrace, reception in the grand ballroom inside. I wore the dress Judith had selected for me. That's not a misprint. 3 months before the wedding, Judith had organized what she called a bride's family coordination, where she selected complementary outfits for the female relatives to ensure visual cohesion in photographs. She had emailed me a picture of a blush pink sheath dress, already purchased in my size, with a note that read, "Something simple and understated felt right for your coloring." Something simple and understated, for my coloring. I wore it because Daniel asked me to, and because I had chosen at some point in the previous months to decide that this was not the hill I was going to die on. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that very expensive things always are. The flowers were real peonies flown in from somewhere. The string quartet didn't miss a note. Vanessa looked stunning. Cole cried when he saw her, which I'll admit was genuinely lovely. I sat in the family section, 3rd row, slightly to the outside. Positioned, I noticed, just far enough from Judith and Glenn that we wouldn't appear in the same frame as the photographer swept the row. During cocktail hour, I found myself in the inevitable situation of being introduced to Cole's extended family by Judith, who described me each time as Daniel's wife, who works at the hospital. The pause before "who works at the hospital" did a lot of heavy lifting. I shook hands. I made conversation. I answered questions about what shift I worked and whether the hospital parking was really as bad as people said. Cole's grandfather, a man named Whitfield, not Cole's actual grandfather but an honorary title the family used for an elderly great-uncle who had essentially raised Cole's father, found me during the cocktail hour standing by the hedge, slightly apart from the crowd holding a glass of water. He was in his late 70s, using a cane, wearing a suit that fit him the way suits only fit people who've been wearing them their whole lives. He didn't introduce himself right away. He just stood beside me and looked out at the lawn. "You're not drinking," he said. "I'm working tomorrow morning," I told him. 6 a.m. He looked at me sideways. "What do you do?" "Trauma nurse." He was quiet for a moment. "I had a daughter who was a nurse, 30 years. Was she retired? I tried to throw her a party. She told me not to make a fuss." He smiled. "She was the most capable person I've ever known. Calmer in a crisis than anyone I've ever seen in any boardroom." I didn't say anything. I just held my water glass and looked out at the lawn with him. "You have that look," he said after a moment. "What look?" "Like you've seen things you're not going to describe at a dinner party." I laughed. It came out real, which surprised me. "That's accurate," I said. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask me what things. He just stood there for another minute, and then he excused himself politely and went back into the crowd. I watched him go. There was something about the way he moved, the particular straightness of his spine that didn't look like posture but like habit. I recognized it. I'd seen it in the veterans who came through our unit, the ones who'd learned to carry something heavy so long it just became how they stood. The reception moved inside at sunset. The ballroom at Whitmore was all pale gold light and round tables dressed in white and more peonies. Daniel was in his groomsman duties and I found my assigned seat at a table near the back. Not the back, not banished, but definitely not the family table. I was seated with two of Cole's college friends and their dates and a cousin of Vanessa's who I'd met twice and couldn't remember the name of. It was fine. It was genuinely fine. I'm good at making conversation. I'm good at being pleasant in situations that aren't entirely comfortable. 26 years of being the scholarship kid in the private school cafeteria will train you for that. The toasts started after dinner. Cole's best man went first. Charming, a little drunk, told a story about a trip to Costa Rica that probably should have been edited. Then Vanessa's maid of honor, who cried through most of hers and was forgiven for it, because she clearly meant every word. Then, Glenn stood up. Glenn's toast was about the family he'd built. It was about legacy and investment and watching his children make choices that reflected well on everything he'd worked for. He talked about Vanessa's ambition, and Cole's flea's excellent reputation and the kind of future that was being secured at this table tonight. He said the word excellence 4 times. He said the right kind of people once, which landed with a small silence that he didn't seem to notice. He thanked Daniel for being a steady presence in the family. He did not mention me. Not in the toast, not in the acknowledgement of partners and spouses that he circled back to at the end. He looked directly at Daniel's table, at the table where I was not sitting, and raised his glass to our family, growing and thriving. Daniel caught my eye across the room. He shook his head slightly. I shook mine back. Later, I mouthed. He nodded. I excused myself to get more water from the bar and stood for a moment in the corridor outside the ballroom, next to a potted ficus that had probably seen worse than this. I texted my charge nurse on the overnight shift to confirm handoff notes for morning. I breathed. I was walking back toward the ballroom when the event coordinator found me, a woman in a black blazer with an earpiece moving very quickly. "Are you Leah?" she asked. I told her I was. She looked relieved in a way that suggested something had gone wrong. "We have a situation," she said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to. Please just hear me out before you answer." What had happened was this: the estate had a secondary event space, a glass-walled pavilion on the east side of the property, which had been booked for the same evening by a separate organization. A non-profit that ran fundraising events for pediatric healthcare in underserved communities. Their keynote speaker, a physician from the city, had driven down from a conference 3 hours away and collapsed in the parking lot 20 minutes ago. Possible cardiac event. The estate's first aid trained staff had responded. But there was no medical personnel at either event, and the man was conscious but in distress, and someone had asked around and been told that there was a trauma nurse at the wedding. They just need someone to assess him until the ambulance gets here, the coordinator said. I know this is completely outside the bounds of, where is he? I said. I was already moving. I won't walk you through the clinical details because that's not the point of this story. What I'll tell you is that the man, whose name was Dr. Emmett, and who turned out to be a cardiologist, which I found grimly amusing, had an irregular heart rhythm that needed monitoring and a blood pressure that was doing things I didn't like. I kept him calm, I kept him still. I talked to the paramedics on the phone before they arrived and relayed specifics. When the ambulance pulled up, the Leah paramedic looked at me and said, "Did you do this intake?" And I said yes, and she said, "Perfect, thank you." Dr. Emmett was stable. He went to the hospital, he would be fine. I didn't go back into the ballroom immediately. I sat on the stone steps outside the pavilion in my blush pink sheath dress and my wedding heels, and I let my hands stop trembling. That always happens after, not during, never during, only after. The nonprofit's event coordinator came to find me. She was a woman in her 50s, silver-haired, composed in the way that people who run nonprofit galas are always composed, because something is always going wrong. She sat down on the steps beside me without asking. Dr. Emmett is the reason we've been able to fund 3 pediatric ICU wings in this state, she said. He's been our keynote for 8 years. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Can I ask your name? I told her, Leah. She said it like she was writing it down somewhere in her memory. What do you do when you're not saving keynote speakers at galas? I told her I was a trauma nurse. I told her where I worked. She tilted her head slightly. St. Augustine Regional, she said. The apartment explosion response. I looked at her. I'm on the State Healthcare Excellence Advisory Board, she said simply. We recommended your commendation to the governor's office. We sat in silence for a moment. You're supposed to receive your award in 2 weeks, she said. I know, I said. I'm missing the gala, my sister-in-law's reception. She looked at me and then she looked back at the dark lawn. Well, she said, it seems like you've been doing the work whether anyone's watching or not. I went back inside. The dancing had started. I found Daniel on the floor with Vanessa, doing an enthusiastic and technically terrible rendition of something by Bruno Mars. I watched them from the edge of the room and felt something complicated, love for him and grief, and a sharp, clear pride that had nowhere to put itself. Glenn found me at the edge of the dance floor. He had a fresh drink. He was in the expansive mood that comes after a successful toast. There you are, he said. We were wondering where you'd gotten to. I told him there had been a medical situation at the adjacent event. Someone had needed help. He absorbed this. Oh, he said. Well, good thing you were here, I suppose. He said it the way you'd say, good thing we had an umbrella. Useful object language. He took a sip of his drink and looked out at the dance floor. Glenn, I said, something in my voice made him look at me. I wasn't angry, that surprised me. I'd thought, over the previous months, that when the moment came I would feel angry. But what I felt was something much quieter and much more final. I felt like I was setting something down that I'd been carrying for a long time. I want to tell you something, I said. And I'm telling you because you're my family, and I think you deserve to know, not because I want anything from you. He waited. 3 weeks ago, I ran the trauma response during the apartment explosion on Meridian Street. I was the senior medical person on the floor for 28 minutes before the attending physician arrived. I made triage decisions and supervised the team through 4 simultaneous critical patients. I paused. In 2 weeks, I'm receiving the Governor's Award for Emergency Service. It's the highest civilian healthcare recognition in the state. Glenn looked at me. His drink was halfway to his mouth and he had stopped moving. I'm not telling you this to embarrass you, I said. I'm telling you, because when you said tonight that I took this job because I wasn't cut out for something better, you were wrong, and I wanted you to know that. I watched him process it. I watched the different expressions move across his face. Surprise, recalibration, a flicker of something that might have been shame. Leah, he started. You don't have to say anything, I said. I just needed you to hear it. I walked back to the dance floor and found Daniel. I tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened?" I shook my head. "Tell you later," I said. "Dance with me." He danced with me. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that the nonprofit coordinator, whose name was Margaret, had made a phone call that night. She had spoken to someone at the governor's office. She had explained what had happened, that the nurse being honored for emergency medical service had spent part of her sister-in-law's wedding reception stabilizing the organization's keynote speaker on a set of stone steps. The governor's office called the hospital the next morning. The hospital called me. My nursing director said, "Leah, I need you to come in for a meeting. And please don't panic, everything is fine," which is never something that makes a person not panic. But I went. The meeting was with my director, the chief nursing officer, and a representative from the governor's communications team, a young man named Elliot, who was visibly uncomfortable in a hospital setting and kept touching the wall-mounted hand sanitizer. The governor, Elliot explained, had been looking for an opportunity to present my award in a context that was more. His word was resonant. The gala was formal and well-attended, but the governor had wanted to do something with more direct community visibility. When Margaret's call had come in describing what I'd done at Whitmore Estate and who had witnessed it, the representatives from the nonprofit, the estate staff, and, importantly, several board members of Cole's family's charitable foundation, the governor's team had an idea. They wanted to come to the hospital. Not a press event, Elliot clarified quickly, not a media circus, a presentation in the main atrium, invitation only, staff and invited guests. The awards ceremony that I'd been set to receive at the gala, they wanted to do it here, where I actually worked. Where the people who'd stood beside me during the explosion response could be present. I said yes. The ceremony was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the wedding. Daniel was there. My mother drove 4 hours to be there. My overnight shift team was there, most of them in scrubs because they'd just come off shift or were heading into one. Dr. Anand was there, Margaret was there. Dr. Emmett, now recovered, sent a video message, and Glenn and Judith were there. Because Daniel had told them. Because Daniel, my good, outgunned, trying his best husband, had called his father the morning after the wedding and said, "I need to tell you something about my wife." I didn't know they were coming until I looked out at the atrium from the staff corridor and saw Judith sitting in the 4th row with her hands folded in her lap and her spine very straight. The way she sat when she was trying not to let her face show what she was feeling. Glenn was beside her. He was not performing for anyone. He was just sitting there. The governor was a tall woman with a handshake like a door closing. She said my name clearly when she presented the award and described, briefly, the events of the explosion response in language that was accurate and unembellished. She mentioned, without drama, that 3 days ago the same nurse had provided emergency assessment for a cardiac event while attending a family wedding. She pinned the award to my jacket, a small gold medallion on a blue and white ribbon, and shook my hand again. The atrium applauded. I looked out at the rows of people. I found Daniel's face first, then my mother's. Then, near the back, Whitfield, Cole's honorary grandfather, who had somehow heard about the ceremony and come, sitting very straight the way he always sat, nodding once when I caught his eye, and Glenn. Glenn, who was not performing and not networking and not managing appearances. Glenn, who was just sitting there, watching his daughter-in-law receive a state award in a hospital atrium on a Tuesday afternoon, looking like a man who was in the process of understanding something he should have understood a long time ago. He didn't say much to me after. He shook my hand, actually shook it, which he'd never done before, and said, "I didn't know." Just that. 3 words. "I know," I said. Judith hugged me. It lasted longer than any hug she'd given me before. She didn't say anything either. I didn't need them to. The gold medallion on my jacket weighed almost nothing, physically. But I felt it the way I'd felt the medals in stories I'd read. As something real, something earned, something that no one's opinion could add to or take away from. Daniel drove us home that evening. We stopped for burgers at a drive-thru because we were both starving and neither of us could face the idea of cooking. We sat in the car in our own driveway and ate French fries out of the bag. "Your dad shook my hand," I said. "I noticed," Daniel said. "Is that," I tried to find the right word. "Is that the beginning of something, do you think? Or just a moment?" Daniel was quiet for a second. "I don't know," he said. "But I think it's real." I ate another fry. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its Tuesday evening thing, a dog being walked, a kid on a bike, a porch light coming on. Ordinary and completely sufficient. Here's what I know now, sitting with all of it. I spent years making myself smaller in rooms where I felt like I didn't fit. choosing not to mention the award, wearing the selected dress, smiling through toasts that forgot I existed. I told myself it was patience. I told myself it was grace. Maybe some of it was, but some of it was also fear. The same fear that lives in everyone who grew up having to earn their place while watching other people inherit theirs. The fear that if you take up too much space, they'll find a reason to ask you to leave. What I learned on the stone steps outside that pavilion, in a dress I didn't choose, after helping a man I'd never met, is that the work doesn't stop being real because no one's watching. The competence doesn't disappear because it isn't being celebrated at the right table. You don't have to announce yourself to be significant, but you also don't have to stay quiet forever. If you have ever been in a room where your value was reduced to a footnote, I see you, the work you do matters. The quiet hours of it, the unglamorous parts of it, the parts nobody photographs or toasts or puts in a LinkedIn headline. Do you have a story about a moment when the truth finally came out? I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if this resonated with you, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories like this one, from people who held the line until the room finally caught up.